In 1958, I got a telephone call from Gene Schneider, who was a producer of children's musicals in New York. He called me to ask me if I'd be interested in writing the musical score for a new children's musical written by Lawless, if I'd like to do the score and put the songs in for production off-Broadway. And I said I would be very interested. I didn't have any experience in doing children's musicals before, but I decided that I would take a shot at it anyway. So I worked with Wally. He wrote the story, and I wrote the score, the music and lyrics of this 35-minute musical. It was about a cowboy and a tiger and other animals in the zoo. But the most interesting part of it was that it was a quest of a young man who's 12 years old. And I won't tell you the story because you've already seen it, but I would like to tell you some of the things that happened as a result of it. First of all, it ran for 2 years.
The young man who played the tiger called me late, like 4 o'clock in the afternoon or something, and he said, "Sue, listen, they're looking for somebody to be in this show called The Cowboy and the Tiger. And they're still at the Variety Arts, which was the old place where everybody auditioned. And get over there, because they're looking for a comic. They're looking for somebody who can sing." Oops. Anyway, so I grabbed the one piece of sheet music that I had. It was, That's Why the Lady is a Tramp. And I rush over there, and if anybody remembers the Variety Arts, old Variety Arts, and as I'm rushing in the creaking elevator, they're coming down. They're about to go down, so I think, oh, I've missed it. But it was Wallace Gray who wrote the book, and it was Hank Beebe, the composer. And they kind of looked at each other, because apparently they hadn't found anyone. Or, I don't know about that, but anyway, they said, "Oh, well, okay, you're here." So we go in, and Hank said, "I don't want to play the piano because I want to hear you." And I said, "Well, okay, but I don't know." Anyway, it ended up somehow that I played for myself. And if you've ever heard me play the piano, it's amazing. They were still talking to me after the audition. But anyway, I stumbled my way through this. And they were very sweet, very kind, and like not everyone can be in an audition, and they didn't have to say next because there was nobody next. And I went home, "Oh, that was awful. Oh." And of course, the next day I got a call and said, "Would you come and join us and play Peacock?"
We played for 2 years, and then a friend of mine who was a musical director in New York of some experience saw one of the performances and said, "That would make a great television special." And I said, "Well, I think so too. What can we do about it?" He said, "Let's take it to Sonny Fox."
It all began with a phone call.
Sonny Fox was a very well-known New York children's television star.
This phone call came from a man who said his name was Maurice Levine, and that he was the head of the symphony and the music program at the YMHA in New York, and that they were going to do 2 musicals for Mother's Day, and they would like me to host it, and the composer was there with him. Could they come over to Channel 5, the television station at which I was performing, and play the music for me? Out of nowhere, that phone call arrived. So I said, "Well, okay."
And he was approachable. We went to see him.
So they came over, and we went up to the 5th floor where I was told there was a piano. It was also an unused studio, and it was jammed with stuff. And we had to move stuff away to get access to the grand piano, which fortunately was in tune. And that's when I met Hank Beebe, the composer of The Cowboy and the Tiger.
And I ran through the show for him. I sat at the piano and I did all the lines and all the songs.
They sat down and Hank started playing the music and singing some of the songs. And it wasn't long before I said, oh yeah, this is great stuff.
And he went crazy about it. He said, this is wonderful. This is terrific. This would make a wonderful show. Let's see what we can do about it.
The first involvement that I had with it was as a concert at what I think was the YMHA on the east side of Manhattan, with Maurice Levine conducting, a full orchestra, and it was of both the Cowboy and the Tiger and Captain Billy. It was the other show on the bill.
Off we went, and on that Easter Sunday, I showed up, and I played the host and played several parts, and other people played the cowboy and the tiger and the peacock and the bear and so on. And it went very well. And I was totally charmed, but I thought the Cowboy and the Tiger was the better one. So I tried to figure out what I wanted to do with that, and I finally got a booking in a shopping center in New Jersey for, I think it was 18 performances over maybe 10 days, I can't remember exactly that, in a theater there to play it. And I kept playing the part of the host and the other parts in the show. The way it got on television is that one of the performances, an ad agency guy who was a client, had clients on my television show, came to watch it. He was so charmed and so excited that he decided to get some of his clients to back a syndicated version that would be syndicated from station to station around the country. So we started planning that, and lo and behold, it turned out to be a CBS network show that we had upgraded.
Now I ran into a problem. Wallace Gray, who wrote the story, liked the show the way it was. And in order to do it on television, we had to add about 12 minutes of material to fit the format of an hour show on television. I was all for it, but Wally didn't like the idea of changing anything. And I had to convince him that it wouldn't change anything, it would just make everything better by taking more time to make our points. Anyhow, it took me a while, but I finally was able to get Wally to go along with this.
When we did the show on the stage, when the cowboy finally sees the tiger and tries to convince the tiger to be his horse, that was all written, that was all spoken. When we were going to go to television, Maurice and I went to Hank Beebe and said, that might be more effective if you could do that as a song. And Hank said, okay.
It turned out that the addition of the 12 minutes was critical in the future success of the show. First of all, we renamed it. It used to be called the Singing Guitar, which was a framework for several shows, not just the one about the cowboy. And we had to make it more specific, so we just made it the Cowboy and the Tiger. Second of all, in adding the 12 minutes, it was mostly to do with the tiger. First of all, we put a new song for him called Ferocious.
I'm ferocious. That's what they call me, ferocious. Boy, does it gall me, especially the way they never think to say I'm tall, I'm small, I'm anything at all except ferocious. But one word they know, that's ferocious. It makes me so depressed to realize that no one ever tries to open up his eyes and see plain old unferocious.
Hank also was so prolific. He had a song for the stage version where you meet the three animals for the first time, which was fine. Suddenly he shows up with another song. I didn't ask him to write another song. He just came up with that, which was also very good. I had to figure out which one I wanted to use. But at any rate, Hank was so wonderful and flexible in terms of how he worked with us, and just the writing of that new song was astonishing.
Secondly, the scene which was all dialogue, in which the cowboy lassos the tiger and says, "At last I've found a horse," and his confusion at first about what the cowboy has in mind. We took our time so that we musicalized this whole scene in which we find out that the cowboy thinks that the tiger would make a wonderful horse.
And he came back with this great song, "I Need You," counterposed with the tiger's song about, "Can't you see how vicious I am?"
I only ask you, come where I lead you, because I need you, that's why.
That climax and it made it so much more effective, a dramatic moment in the show to do that as a song, which is why you do musicals in the first place. The music that can enhance and intensify the emotions. And that's what it did there.
And the tiger is in a complete tizzy about whether to go and free himself. He's gotten out of his barred cage and gotten as far as Central Park, but he's got long way further to go to be free of the range of the warden of the caretakers of the zoo. So he is struggling with this impasse. Shall I run, or shall I stay here and be this boy's horse? Because I would love to be this boy's horse.
And then I needed to recast it for television. And then I told CBS that I was going to use Jack Guilford as the man-eating tiger. And I got very quiet for a couple of days. I called my agent and said, "What's going on?" He said, "Well, you got to get somebody besides Jack Guilford." I said, "Really? Why?" "Well, he's on the blacklist." I said, "This is 1963. That was back in the 50s. What is with the black?" No, he still was in contempt of Congress. At one point, he wouldn't name people. And for the last 10 years, he's not been able to work in television or film. I said, "Are you kidding me? He's been in the Cracker Jack commercials for a year." "Yeah, but we don't use his name." Huh. So if I say those two words, Jack Guilford, the Republic is going to crumble? I said, "You go back and tell CBS," this is my agent, "you go back and tell CBS, if Jack Guilford is not cleared, I'm not doing the show." Got quiet for a couple of days, and finally they called me back and said, "Okay, Jack Guilford is cleared." First time he was able to use his name and perform on television in 10 or 12 years of that blacklist. So that's one of the great things that came out of doing the Cowboy and Tiger.
David Wayne was the big movie star. And he was sweet as could be. He would take me to lunch at the little restaurant across the street, and we'd talk. And Jack, I love being with Jack because he would come back with these horror stories. He was doing funny thing happened to the forum, and on the way to the forum, and he'd come back moaning about Zero Mostel stealing his laughs. And of course, this all made me feel like I was in, talking with the big guys. And Nat Fry was this great big, he was a teddy bear. He was just the sweetest guy. And he, I just loved to be with him. And of course, he was in that wonderful quartet, "You Gotta Have Heart" from Damn Yankees. And here were these people. And then, of course, there was Paul O'Keefe, who was, the size of a pea at the time. And the things I remember, one of the things I remember was watching him and Jack dancing together, doing the old soft paw.
To me, it was just a lot of fun. And these people were fun to be with. Sue, for example, was very funny. And we actually had a scene about using ain't or aren't instead of amn't. I thought it was fun back then, as a kid. And so that kind of stuff was just, fun for me to do. I didn't think of, this is being taped, for example, or that, I needed to be anxious about it. So that kind of stuff was just fun. I really enjoyed working with David Wayne. He was, because he's the narrator in the thing, but then you have the two scenes at the beginning and the end where he plays the old timer. And he just had kind of a really easy way about the way he made his character. And I think that helped me because, he came in at each end of it. So for me to have maybe a different take on how things were going, especially at the end from the beginning, that I think he helped me to sort of guide that way with the way he presented himself. And then of course Jack is, he's hysterically funny. And the soft paw thing that we did was definitely the high point of my dancing career. It's all been downhill since then. But he moved so well. And, he also had a style that I kind of followed along, and then he also worked with me before we actually shot that scene.
And so I then began to make all the arrangements for taping in one day, because I didn't have much of a budget for this. So one of the people I knew up in Connecticut was David Wayne. I sent him the recording from the Y, and he agreed to be in it. We got a wonderful cast together. On we went to do one day of taping. That's all I could afford to do with my cast. Everybody was ready to go. I met with the director before the show, the day before the show. I said, give me your plot, your plan, what are you doing? He never mentioned the lighting. Everything seemed okay. He was a guy who had actually directed a show on CBS I did in the 1950s, and I knew him. So I said, okay. The next day, I walked in at 8:30 in the morning. We were supposed to start taping around 9. And the lighting plot was very strange for Cowboy and the Tiger, just pools of light and darkness everywhere else. And this is Texas, where we first started. Rain. I said, that won't work. And I couldn't get Roger, the director, on the phone. And I just had to change it. I said, no, take down the lighting, redo it. Now that took 4 hours of our shooting day. Jack arrived, by the way, Jack Guilford, as they all did early on, because they were going to be taping by 9 o'clock. And he was wonderful. He just entered. I had my father came to watch me being the superb producer. And of course, we sat around for 4 hours while they relit. Jack was wonderful. He kept entertaining everybody. Just kept everybody laughing. Finally, after all 4 hours I was lighting, my director showed up and he was very ticked off that I had changed his lighting plot. I said, sorry, it had to be changed. You were not available to consult with. So my one day of shooting turned out to be a half day of shooting. That meant that we had to go to Monday for shooting. Now, the complications of that were everybody was signed for Sunday, including a live orchestra of about 13 pieces in the studio to do the music track, and for everybody to sing live with the orchestra. So that was one complication. The orchestra couldn't be the next day because they all had other gigs. So after everybody left the studio that evening, we lay down with Maurice Levine conducting our 13-piece orchestra. The score that remained, which was pretty much a lot of it, that we were going to have to do the next day and they would sing with. I stood next to Maurice and then tried to indicate the pauses in the song. The song would start, it would take a break for narrative, and then pick up again. And the question is, how long would that pause be? So I cued, they would stop, and I would think, remembering how they did this, and then indicate it was time to pick up the music. So those interspersed silences that the singing was stopped and the narrative started, and then they had to pick up the singing again on cue, that was a big problem. But anyway, so I did the best I could of working with Maurice to get those interspersed silences and then pick up the music. So Maurice and I stayed behind with the orchestra, and we redid that, laid down the rest of the soundtrack. I don't remember what time at night we left. I think the irony is we left and Maurice had a flat tire on his car. Good. So the next morning we all got there early, and they, troopers that they were, went through the whole thing, and they did brilliantly, getting the pickups. The young cowboy who had a lot of that, and the coordinating all of those silences with the pickups, the brakes, was just amazing that they did it as well as they did. They were just wonderful. And then we went through the entire day, and I don't remember how late it was when we finished. And then we had it all done. Now, the consequences of that to me, to pay the extra money that I had to put up for the golden time, for the overtime, for the actors, all of that, that was a big hunk of bucks. So I took out a loan on my insurance policy because I wanted this show to be on.
But I have a memory of Sonny Fox coming back into our set and studio and saying, "I've just made enough money for us to finish this." Definitely cracked everybody up.
We had a terrible problem. The day we were going to do the show, we had the orchestra all lined up in its place, full orchestra, but the lighting man had misunderstood, and the lighting was all wrong. And Sonny, the producer, had to get the lighting man to come in and work all night to change the lighting. But now we had another day when we would do it. So we had to pre-record the orchestra while they were sitting there and do the whole score without the voices, and hope that they could do it to a tape playback of the recording. That was very hard, first of all, to figure when we had dialogue between sections of a song, where we would start up the music again. So we would read the dialogue and try to take it at the same pace that we expected that the players would. We were guessing. But we had very good players, because the next day they were wonderful. When we actually shot the show to playback, they were able to stay right with the music. Paul O'Keefe, 12 years old, who was playing on Broadway at the time, was right on every minute. He knew just where his accompaniment came in. He'd talk, and then he'd sing and talk and sing and come right in with the music. Perfect. So did Jack Guilford. The same kind of experience and awareness of what was going on and what our problems were. We did retape the old soft paw on the following day, because we felt that we almost got it, but we wanted to try to get it fully, and we did get it fully on the retake. But that was the only thing we had to do over. So I would say that because we had very good people, they were able to accommodate to the doing it with the playback.
David Wayne came in with his Val packed. He had an invitation on Monday night to be at the White House for dinner, and he wasn't going to miss that, and he had a plane reservation. So when we started that day, and everybody had to be on stage all the time, because this was a through piece, and I couldn't just let him go early and let him leave or lay down his track, because he's with the other people on the stage when he's doing this. So that was another thing. I had to get it finished with the taping early enough so that he could take off and get to the White House. He was not going to hang around for the rest of it if not. We did that also. So it was a very complicated show for something that looks so simple.
The unfortunate part of it, as we all know by now, was that it was shown the week that JFK was assassinated.
Our show was on the week that Kennedy was killed in Dallas. President Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, and we came on a couple of days later with a show about Texas and a young cowboy. And it bothered us that we had this tragedy looming over. The country was all staggered by the assassination. And then we had, that was on Thanksgiving. I think the assassination was on Tuesday. And then Thursday was Thanksgiving. And then we did it again on the Sunday following Thanksgiving. And I think by the Sunday, it was people were settled down. So that Sunday, I got a call from a friend, and she said, "I knew that was your score before I saw the credits." She said, "That was terrific." She was the mother of a single mother of several children who had thought it was wonderful, but she did too. And that was helpful to hear from somebody that it wasn't completely, the tragedy was not completely crowding out in people's minds the possibility of a light fantasy like we were presenting.
Now, we were scheduled to go on in late November. And it was in mid-November that the assassination of JFK took place. And everybody, all the networks, went off commercial programming for 4 days to observe the news of the assassination, everything that happened, and finally the funeral, and off to the cemetery. And for 4 days, each of the networks dropped all commercials. And we all had that somber 4 days. The day after, on the 26th of November, when commercial programming came back, was the day we were on. And it's so interesting that looking at the reviews of the show, at least 2 of the reviews mentioned how tough it was to go back to normal programming after what we had all been through. And the thing that saved the day was the Cowboy and the Tiger. It got excellent reviews. It got really wonderful reviews, so much that CBS actually repeated the show at 6 o'clock in the evening 10 days later. That was pretty good.
This show is timeless.
There's a great simplicity about it, and that gives one joy. And it's easy, it's just fun. That's how I remember it. I just remember its sweetness.
We are not talking about any particular time in history. We're not talking about any particular culture. This thing could play just as well translated into other languages, because it is about a basic human need, the need to be needed. And the Cowboy and the Tiger is based on that thought. Everything that happens in that show is about needing to be needed, so that it's universal. There is no culture that does not have that need, and there is no time when it would not be contemporary.
Imagination can really play a role because there aren't enormous sets. There aren't a whole bunch of things going on. There wasn't a lot of chasing people around or whatever. So it allows, particularly a young imagination, to be able to get themselves into the story. And I think that's a good thing, and probably at least as useful now as it was then, because we live in a world where there's a lot of really literal stuff, and it's not necessarily leaving much room for the individual to supply some imagination.
It was a glorious experience.
But I was so delighted that it was on. I was so delighted with the reviews. And it's one of my proudest achievements was doing the Cowboy.